Hello, I'm Mr. Polk and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'd like to take a look at the cuts of pork. We can start by looking at the primal cuts where we have the shoulder butt and then behind that is the loin. Then you have the ham section and then underneath is the belly and then we finish with the picnic shoulder. Now let's take a look at these different cuts. The first cut that we'll take a look at is the shoulder butt. A lot of times this is called the Boston butt. It's the top of the shoulder where the blade is. So you can get this bone or boneless. This one has the bone in and it's the shoulder blade. So people always wonder what that bone is. That's the wide shoulder blade that sits on the top. Now this meat is definitely a tougher cut of meat. It's worked a lot. It's the muscles on the top of the pig, the top of the shoulder. You can see all the fat and all the striations in there. This can get cut into steaks, but they're not like a normal steak. It's just a smaller section. This is kind of a retail name. This is something you would want to cook slow and low for your pulled pork and things like that. The other one for pulled pork is the picnic shoulder. The picnic shoulder comes lower on the animal, and here you can see that where here is where the meat would be. In fact, you can actually see the skin is still on this one. This would be the outside of the animal. This would be kind of the front, his front leg. This would be the bottom portion of the shoulder. So imagine the pig hunched over. He's got the top shoulder with the blade, and this goes underneath, and then this goes down into the leg. Okay, so it has a little bit of the leg hock section there. But you can see that again, it's a real fatty cut, but it's something that we do slow and low. We put it in the oven or smoke it or whatever. This is the cut we're going to do for our pulled pork sandwiches, where you're going to just cook it really low in a long time and just let it break down and let the fat render out. You'll have a nice cut. Then we get into the loin section. The loin section would be the middle of the animal, and it has a lot of the good cuts. Pretty much the loin has two different ends. You have the end coming from the shoulder, then you have the end going in to the ham, which would be the sirloin end. The first part of the loin is where you get a cut that a lot of people get confused about. They'll call these country ribs. You see them sold as a country cut rib, country style rib. And they really come from pretty much where the shoulder ends, and it's that first start of the rib, okay? Because if you can picture the animal, it has the shoulder blade. The shoulder blade goes over a couple sections of rib. They take a cut from where the shoulder blade is and where the rib is, and it creates these country style ribs that have, you can see that the coloration. They have a little bit of the loin, a little bit of the rib area, something cooked, slow and low again. A lot of times these are boneless. Like you can see, this one doesn't really have the bone in because the bone is either a small rib bone, like you see here, or it's just actually a section that's still cut from the shoulder blade. But this area, again, it's called a country style rib. You'll see them sold a lot. A lot of people think that they're, a baby back or a St. Louis. They're not. They just come from the loin still, but they come from right behind the shoulder. And that's why I wanted to show you that. Then we get into the loin. Now this isn't the whole loin. This is a section of it. This is the center cut. It would still extend out to the shoulder and extend back to the sirloin. This is where you get the full loin is where you would get your pork chops from. The best pork chops are going to come from what we call the center cut, which is what I have here. And then as you cut them closer to the shoulder, there'd be a shoulder cut. There's also the rib cut chop. And then as you get closer to the ham, it's the sirloin chop. But when you usually think of America's pork chop, you usually think of this one, which is coming from the center cut of the loin. Now, just like on the cow and the steer, where you have the loin, it's separated into two parts, the main loin and the tenderloin. It's the same thing. Here is what a tenderloin would look like, and we're going to cook one of these later. So the tenderloin would be on the top of the animal, and then the loin is below it. And I got a really neat cut to show you that. This is what they call this a porterhouse pork chop, in that it's cut just like a porterhouse is, but it's from the pig. It has your normal pork chop here, your center cut pork chop on this side, and then this section, just like on a porterhouse, it has the tenderloin cut. So this helps you kind of visualize where this would be the vertebrae coming on the animal, and it would have the tenderloin and then have the main pork loin. Then from the outside of the pork loins, you have your ribs. Now, The ribs start at the top of the animal. Picture the animal sideways. They start at the top of the animal and come down. The ribs at the top are the better ribs. That's what's called the baby back. All right, and you can see the baby back ribs. They just have the tissue on the back, and then you have all your meat on this side. But these are your smaller cut of ribs. They're more tender. They're the ones that are up high in the animal. And then as the ribs go down, that's where you get into the St. Louis. If you go places, they'll ask you, do you want the baby back or the St. Louis? The St. Louis ones are a little fattier because they come from the lower area of the animal in the belly region. So the ribs that come from the loin, which is what we're talking about, come from the top. That's why they're the baby backs. These are the really nice ribs. But again, you got to cook them slow and low so they fall apart. But if you get ribs that have the curved bone like this, that's going to be the baby back. As the rib bones go down, they straighten out, and that's when you have the St. Louis. And I don't have an example of those. All right. Now we work our way back. So we're past the loin. We're now into the ham. The ham is the back section of the animal, and it's funny because you call the shoulder the butt, and everybody's like, oh, what is the butt? But they have no problem with the ham. Now this comes from the back. So here you can see where the leg would have come from. So this is the back end of the animal. And what makes the ham different, because everybody always asks, is it looks different, it's got a different color. That's because you usually don't get a fresh ham. You can buy fresh hams. Fresh hams would be just like all this other meat sitting here. But hams are usually cured or smoked or both. It just depends on the way that the company does it. A lot of times they're cured with a sodium solution or a nitrate solution, and then that cures the meat, and then they're usually done through a cold smoke process to give it more flavor. And again, every company does it a little bit differently of how they cure it. Then we get to the last section, which is the belly. And the belly is where we have the bacon. And this comes as the pork belly. It's a slab underneath the animal. And then we cut the slab into slices, and that's where we get our bacon. Now this is a thick cut bacon. Bacon is the same thing. It's cured. It's cured either dry with a salt, or they do the solution, either way. And then it's done through the smoke process. And that's where you see things like hickory smoked bacon or applewood smoked bacon, things like that. So that's for the bacon. And that's obviously one of my favorite parts, the bacon coming from the belly. And what I want you to see is before we start cooking, rather than just looking at diagrams, I wanted you to see the cuts of meat. I wanted you to see how the animal starts with the shoulder butt and the shoulder blade. And then you've got the picnic shoulder, which is to the front and the underside. And then you get into the loin, that transition area of the loin where it's up, where it connects to the shoulder. And that's where you have the country style ribs, country cut ribs. They aren't really a rib per se, but they come from that section, and they're a nice cut because they're a little more inexpensive because they're from an in-between cut. And a lot of times they are boneless because the bones are just either pieces of shoulder or the upper tighter curve of the rib. Then you get into the main loin. Okay, this is just the center of it, so imagine it being longer. And again, the one end, the meat transitions. As the meat transitions from the shoulder to the sirloin, you get different types of pork chops, and you'll see that many times. Again, you see the center cut, which comes out of here, but you can also see the sirloin chop or a rib chop. And then that's where your baby backs come from. Remember, they're going to look like this. And then we finish with our ham and then our bacon. So I want to thank you for cooking with me today and taking a look at the different cuts of pork. It's not often that you have this many different cuts laying out and being able to look at. So I love being able to share that with you. And I can't wait to cook with you next time right here in Mr. Polk's Kitchen.